to our Dublin Sunday feast, the Dublin Hare Krishna Sunday Love Feast. I will just chant a little Hare Krishna before we start and then speak a little bit about Krishna and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Okay. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nivashesha Sunyavadi Paschita De Shatarane Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, sorry about that. The frog in the throat program, not actually sure where that saying came from, but I think everybody knows what it means. So, I've survived. So, good afternoon, everybody. And today, excuse me, just trying to get rid of that frog. Today, I wanted to, I just want to reflect on something that kind of happened to me yesterday. Nothing particularly dramatic in one sense, but it was just, for me at least, it was quite a curious thing. As you know, many companies, they use quite an intelligent ploy, in an attempt to keep customers in their stores, if you like, in their shops. Actually, I'm actually going to start, if you just bear with me, I'm on my own here actually, but if you just bear with me 10 seconds, because I don't actually have any water beside me. I just need to go and just get some water, otherwise I'll be coughing all through this. So just 1 second, thank you. Okay, my apologies. Hopefully that will suffice. Just another aspect of the material world we live in. The material body does things that we don't necessarily want, and particularly at times that we want. So anyway, as I was saying, that many companies, they adopt that, clever ploy of trying to keep people in their shops for as long as possible. I think one thing they do, I was told some years back, is they rearrange their aisles as much as they can, so as that people can't just go in and know exactly where to go to get things. They have to go, if they rearrange, they have to then go and try and find a new place, and by doing that they have to walk around, and hopefully, I think the idea is they'll see other things and then think, oh, I need that, or I should get that. But another one is they play music, and the music that they play, And by the way, yesterday it was one of the first outings I've had since this whole pandemic struck. At least not going outside for exercise and all of that, but going to an enclosed place. And the place that I went to was a wholesaler's called Musgraves. And so I went there, and as I say, they were playing music, and more or less almost as soon as I went in. And they play music that straddles the generations, because, you know, they're going to have customers, I guess, paying customers, you know, maybe in their 20s, certainly 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even like that. So they kind of straddle the generations. So they even connect with my generation when I was a teenager. So some might say, did they have music when you were a teenager? Yes, they did. Anyways, the song, so just yesterday I was in Musgraves, and this song came over the sound system, speakers like that. And I don't think I've heard that song. I'd be very surprised. I haven't heard that song for, you know, probably the best part, if not a little more than 40 years. So, you know, 4 decades, long time. But it is interesting, actually. And actually, that's one reason when children are young in the Vedic system, the traditional system that we, that's most closely associated with modern day India, but it's the Vedic system, which is universal, actually. That's why they actually, when children are young, they train them in learning shlokas or poetry and verses from the Vedic literatures like that, because they stay with you forever. So likewise, my youth and teenage years was used, remembering and listening to different songs, etc. And I still remember so many of them. Anyway, so yesterday I instinctively remember the tune. You just immediately, you hear the first few, I think it's on piano, the first few notes on the piano, and you can immediately recall, wow, I know that song. And then as you listen, you know, you become aware, you start thinking, what is that song? Who sang that? And what is that song? And, you know, eventually you become aware of it. So I instinctively remembered the tune, and even maybe more particularly the distinctive voice of the lady singer. Very kind of distinctive and noticeable. And then, of course, the lyrics started to come flooding back as you're listening to them and as you're remembering them like that. I did, when I got home, actually check the lyrics just to make sure that I was remembering them correctly. And more or less I was. And I want to just recite some of those. I could sing, but that frog in the throat, maybe that's not such a good idea. So, to recite some of the words from that song that I heard yesterday, it goes more or less, I think, exactly like this. When that feeling of meaninglessness sets in, go blowing my mind on God. The light in the dark with the neon arms, the meek he seeks, the beast he calms, the head of the good soul department. Then I see myself suddenly on the piano as a melody, and my terrible fear of dying no longer plays with me, for now I know that I'm needed for the symphony. Now, I'm going to recite those again and you know, sort of just put them in some kind of context. And I'm definitely not sure that when I was 17, I think when I would have first heard the 16, 17, when I would have first heard that song, I'm not sure that I would have understood them, actually, or really, you know, really sort of, delved into them, if you like. But now, listening to them and reading them, I mean, they could have been written by a great devotee of Krishna, actually. And then to go again, when that feeling of meaninglessness sets in. So most people in their lives, if they're fortunate enough, actually, most people in their lives, they will have moments like that when it feels meaningless. What is it all about? Why am I here? And particularly, of course, the big question for everybody is dealing with the transitory nature of the world that we live in, that we're part of, and therefore we also have to leave because it is transitory like that. So I think for the vast majority of people, they have those thoughts. So here the lady is writing that. By the way, she both wrote and composed the music and sang, you know, so quite a talented lady. So when that feeling of meaninglessness sets in, go blowing my mind on God. So basically, I start thinking of God or thinking of the Supreme, which is a very kind of good thing to do. Excuse me. and then refers to God as the light in the dark with the neon arms. Neon arms. I mean, there are different depictions of Jesus, of course, you know, who has his arms outstretched like that. So the light in the dark, particularly. And then the meek he seeks. So this is a biblical reference that the meek shall inherit the earth. And meek, of course, is just another word for humble. And of course, in our Vaishnava tradition, our devotee tradition, in fact, every day devotees will recite the verse Trinadapi Sunichena Tarodapi Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari. And that verse is saying that, you know, about feeling lower than a straw on the street, being more humble than a blade of grass like that. And that with that mentality, Amadina, that we don't seek, you know, praise or distinction or anything like that. And it's that humble mood that then allows us, Kirtana Sadahari, it's with that humble mood, that humble attitude that we can chant the names of God in a really potent and sincere and effective way like that. So the meek he seeks, this is Krishna or God, the meek he seeks, the beast he calms. Now that's a really good one because, you know, within all of us is the devotee and also the non-devotee side, if you like. And that non-devotee side, which is manifest with different qualities such as lust and anger and greed. So anger here is referring to the beast, you know, we all have that inside us. And those qualities like anger, they don't help us in our spiritual life. They don't really help us in our material life either. And generally they're not attractive qualities like that. So this is another reference to God, the beast he calms, or the beast he can calm like that. And then the head of the good soul department. So Krishna is the head of every department actually. But, you know, in that sense, he's the head of the spiritual world, which is where all the good souls are. So the good soul department. So the start of that verse was when that feeling of meaninglessness sets in, but then go blowing my mind on God, thinking of those different qualities of God. So then the second verse is, then I see myself suddenly. Now this lady, as I say, is a musician, and the instrument that she plays, she may play others, but the instrument that she's best known for is playing the piano. So she's using the piano as a kind of metaphor for her. But, you know, it can be anything for any of us. It doesn't have to be a musical instrument even. It can be whatever it is that we can identify with. But she's saying, I see myself suddenly on the piano as a melody, and my terrible fear of dying, which, you know, is pretty wonderful. Actually, this person who wrote the song is a similar age to me. I think a couple of years older than me. So when I was 16, 17, listening to this, you know, she would have only been 18, 19, you know, when she was writing it, etc. So very young in that sense, and quite profound and deep, you know, words that she's writing. So she's saying, my terrible fear of dying. So here we have an 18-year-old girl already identifying with the problem of being in the material world and having to leave it. Now, of course, the wonderful thing for all of us and everybody who we can reach, you know, Krishna just reassures us all the time in the Bhagavad Gita, that for the soul, which is what we all are, there is never birth nor death. Nor having once been do we ever cease to be. We're unborn, eternal, and we will not be slain when the body is slain. So my terrible fear of dying. So that's relating to the body. That's what's dying. So she's saying, now I see myself on the piano as a melody, and my terrible fear of dying no longer plays with me, no longer affects me, is no longer playing with me. For now I know that I'm needed for the greater symphony. So that's basically, for devotees, at least I translate it, as that we're all part of Krishna's plan. And when we go back to the spiritual world, and of course that's entirely in our hands, we can go back immediately, we can take an awful long time to go back. But when we go back to the spiritual world, Krishna has a plan for us, Krishna has a place for us, and we'll be serving him and exchanging an eternal loving relationship with him like that. So that's what this lady's singing about. She may not have all those details, but she is just expressing that so beautifully. So it was quite amazing. It was my first time out, as I said, to go somewhere other than a park or a beach or whatever to walk and exercise. It was my first time to go somewhere indoors, And I go indoors and this is what I hear. And I was thinking, wow. And then I thought I would just express that, because for me it was it was almost like Krishna's arrangement that was happening like that. So Krishna consciousness, it means many things. Just checking the time, don't want to go too long. Krishna consciousness means many things. And not least, as I say, entering into an eternal and ever-growing blissful relationship with the Supreme Person. Advaitam achyutam anadam ananda rupam. There is no limitation to Krishna, and there is no limitation to anything connected to Krishna. So that includes our relationship. And our relationship, any relationship with Krishna is blissful, but because there's no limitation to that relationship, the bliss that we feel is just ever increasing, ever increasing, ever increasing like that. So that's the ultimate goal of Krishna consciousness, to enter into that spiritual relationship based on service with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then experience how nectarine that is, how wonderful that is, and then just keep on experiencing it even more and more and more, because it's ever growing. That said, there's also a more immediate and realizable goal to Krishna consciousness and Krishna conscious understanding and Krishna conscious practice, and that is liberation from the shackles of this material world, liberation from the freedom of the cycle of samsara. And the samsara cycle is 4 things: birth, disease. Hey, disease. There has been nothing more talked about on this planet Earth for the last 14, 15 months or whatever it is than disease. And a specific disease called COVID-19, but disease nonetheless. And that is the world we live in. It's birth. We all took birth here. And of course, as I often say in a curious way, none of us had a choice in that. We talk about being in a country, we're in Ireland, and we talk about Ireland, it's like one of the Western liberal democracies. But we didn't have a democratic choice to come here. Our parents conceived us. They didn't ask us beforehand. That was just forced on us. And we were forced to come here. So in that sense, there was nothing liberal or democratic about that. It was just something that was enforced on us. So birth, disease, talked about that in relation to COVID. Then old age. I should stop dyeing my hair, grey, white. Makes me look older than I am. I am actually only 25, So old age, can't stop it, just can't stop it. That reminds me of another song in my youth. What was it? Something about stopping the clock, let me off at the next stop or whatever, like that kind of thing, But we can't stop the clock. The clock ticks no matter what. And even if your battery in your clock runs out, time is still progressing. It's still ticking invisibly like that. So old age is forced on us also. And then ultimately what that leads to, a combination of, they all lead to it. Birth, one who is born has to die once you're born. But specifically disease and old age is leading to death, leading to us leaving this body. And as that lady was singing, my terrible fear. Here's an 18-year-old, 19-year-old girl basically. My terrible fear of dying like that. So it's a great fear. So Krishna consciousness liberates us from that cycle of samsara, that cycle of birth and death. And Srila Prabhupada advises us in different places, but that he talks about us being unfortunate, being under the influence of the illusory material energy, and that we accept this spot life, is a phrase he uses, but this temporary life, but this spot life of only a few years as our permanent existence. And thus, because we're accepting it in that way, we become illusioned. And we become illusioned by things that we gather and possess throughout our lifetime. The country of our birth, for instance. We're here in Ireland, 100 years ago. 100 years ago was when they got independence. Sort of 105, 6 years ago, something like that. There was the Irish people rose up against the British occupation, and the GPO was a famous landmark for that. And without getting into the relative aspects of that and the rights and wrongs, because that's always there and that can be discussed. But in an absolute sense, we're not Irish, we're not British, we're not Catholic, we're not Protestant, we're not Hindu, we're not Muslim, we're not Jewish. We're none of these things. These are temporary material designations that, because we're thinking this life is so important, or we think it's our permanent existence, as Prabhupada is speaking, we become attached to it. And then once we become attached to that, and possessing our so-called country, our home, our land, our families, our communities, our wealth, etc., which are just false representations that are created by the illusory energy Maya. But under that dictation of Maya's, we fight with one another. Now we're hearing in the news they've started fighting again. Of course, ever since I can remember knowing anything about the geography of the world, the Palestinians and the Jewish people were fighting, or the Israelis and the Palestinians were fighting together. So that goes way back. I think it's anyway, whatever. It goes back to before I was born, and now it's erupted again. All because of this point that the Jews and the Israelis, they're thinking they're Israeli Jews, and the Palestinians are thinking they're Palestinian Muslims, etc. So what are we going to do? We fight like that. Again, there's all relative considerations around that. I'm not making any judgments on the relative considerations, but from an absolute point of view, that is just the reality. Actually, if there were no bodily identification on this planet, if none of us identified with our land of birth, our ethnicity, or indeed our religion, if nobody was identifying with those things, there would be no war. War would not exist. It's all because of this identification with something temporary. And in the context of religion, Prabhupada often quoted a British poet actually called Cowper, who he said, man built the city and God built the country. And he was making the reflection that the city is the mode of passion, and that's man built it, whereas the countryside, etc., is the mode of goodness because it's coming directly from God. And Prabhupada was then making a connection between religion being man-made and spirituality being Krishna-made or God-made like that. So if we identify with religion rather than spirituality, that's also problematic like that, because on the spiritual platform there is no distinction. We are all eternal servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as I've said many times, giving Sunday feast talks, particularly when there's new people or people who are not so familiar with our philosophy, is that Krishna simply means the most beautiful or attractive person. So I was born a Catholic. How can I as a Catholic have any problem with God being referred to as the most beautiful or attractive person? It doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, Jew, Muslim. God's the most beautiful or attractive person. It's the same for all of we. There's no reason to have any dispute around that. So anyway, Maya, we identify with these things. We fight with one another to protect our false possessions of the body. It's a false possession. We don't own it. We didn't create it like that. So we fight over these things, and it's kind of all unnecessary. However, by cultivating spiritual knowledge, we can realize that we have nothing to do with all of this material paraphernalia. And at the moment that we realize that, then we become free from all of this material attachment. And that clearing of all of those misgivings, the clearing of all of those misgivings related to our material existence at once takes place. And this is why Srila Prabhupada set up programs like the Sunday Love Feast, and all over the world every Sunday there are thousands of these Sunday Love Feasts taking place, because once we connect with this philosophy, connect with people or devotees who are following this philosophy, those material misgivings are at once cleared. And also, as we did at the beginning, we also inject transcendental sound vibration into the equation. And it's that transcendental sound vibration that immediately connects us from where we are residing on planet Earth, planet material world, and immediately, instantly connects us with the spiritual realm, that transcendental sound vibration. And once that happens, then we become liberated. Automatically, instantaneously, we become liberated. Now, it's a process, so we have to keep doing that. We have to keep understanding the nature of this material world and the nature of the spiritual world, and we have to keep injecting that transcendental sound vibration into our hearts via our ears like that. But as long as we keep doing that, we're actually in a liberated state. Prabhupada gives the example that there's different types of liberation. So one is somebody who's liberated on an absolute level, and they are never affected by anything material, just that it will have no effect on them. Just like when Krishna descends from the spiritual world, he is in control of the three modes of material nature. So it doesn't affect him. Even though he's in the material world, it has no impact or effect on him. So that's not like, that's not the type of liberation that we have. But probably explains it that we're like a postman. And as long as we follow the process, that we, collect and deliver the mail, then as long as we're following the correct process, so in terms of Krishna consciousness, it's about controlling our senses, engaging in service to Krishna, chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, we are on the liberated platform, and we are in effect liberated. And of course, once we leave this material body, we will immediately return to the spiritual world like that. So that feeling of meaninglessness that was expressed in that song is the same as what Prabhupada is speaking there about lamentation and illusion. That's the meaningless, that's what it is. Once we get onto this process and start engaging in this process, we're like on a fast track route to the spiritual world, and our destination is guaranteed as long as we stay with that process, stay chanting the Hare Krishna mantra like that. And what's also interesting, I thought, was I mentioned earlier that the writer of that song, singer of that song, was a lady. And Srila Prabhupada says some very interesting things as it relates to the fairer sex, or to women and the spiritual path. He talks about that women, as a general rule, of course the song itself would indicate slightly differently, that this lady was really writing kind of some deep stuff, but Prabhupada just explains, as a general rule, women don't get so much into speculating, philosophical speculations, etc. And philosophical speculations in and of themselves can be quite problematic, really, because they can lead us into all sorts of strange places. But anyway, Prabhupada's just saying that men are more inclined to do that than women. So women aren't so inclined to do that. And they have a tendency that once something sounds logical to them and makes sense to them, that they will immediately accept that and kind of grab it, and are very happy to accept the superiority and almightiness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and immediately engage in service, immediately engage in, offering obeisances without any reservation. Whereas men, their false ego tends to be perhaps a little larger, a little bigger. And it makes men more resistant to surrendering, that they tend to resist more like that. So Prabhupada's just talking like that and he gives the example that for this reason, generally, across all religions and spiritual traditions across the planet, that you'll often find that when you go to churches or mosques or temples, etc., that oftentimes, the general congregation at least tends to be made up more of women than men like that. Because of their natural affinity to, accept the authority of the Supreme, rather than trying to fight it or resist it in any way, shape or form. And that's beautiful. Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadabi buddhim yogam tam yena mam upayanti te, that to those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So again, that's kind of like Prabhupada is indicating that that's something that the fairer sex are more inclined towards, or less resistant towards, let's say, whereas men tend to resist it more. And then another nice verse from Bhagavad Gita, Nehabikramna Shoasti Pratyavayona Vijate Swalpamapyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahato Bayat, that in this endeavor, and this is not actually so much, this is across the board for every single one of us, that in this endeavor, meaning the Krishna conscious process, the path of Krishna consciousness, there is no loss or no diminution or decreasing that takes place. And anything that we do, any little advancement we make, any little service that we offer, will always remain with us. It's never taken away. It's not like, probably gives the example of a bank account, that you put money into your bank account, but then if you take money out, the bank manager or whatever takes it away. So you have £100 in, you take out 50, then you've only 50 left. But Prabhupada talks about a spiritual bank account that once you put into it, whatever you've put into it remains there forever, and you can always draw on it. It's not that it decreases or is lost by you like that. So that's also something very nice and encouraging for us to know that whatever we offer to Krishna, whatever service we do, he will always remember it, and it will always be there to our advantage like that. And one more reference, and this is from the Krishna book, so these are directly about the pastimes of Lord Krishna. And Prabhupada talks about that soft-hearted people, and then he immediately says, when he uses the phrase soft-hearted people, such as women. So he doesn't say soft-hearted people such as men, he says soft-hearted people such as women. They hear these transcendental pastimes of Krishna and they immediately become attracted to him. And he goes again to make a similar point, saying that soft-hearted women and girls are therefore very easily drawn to Krishna consciousness. Similar point about women coming to religious functions more than men. So one who's thus drawn to Krishna consciousness and tries to keep themselves in constant touch with such consciousness certainly gains supreme salvation, going back to Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. So if we simply, by developing Krishna consciousness, we can be transferred to the spiritual world and realize that incredible blissful relationship with Krishna. And Prabhupada explains then, imagine how blissful and blessed were the queens of Lord Krishna. So he's talking, this is a pastime related to Krishna when he was residing in Dwarka with all of his queens. So Prabhupada's explaining, how blessed those queens were because they talked to him personally. They saw Krishna face to face, and nobody can properly describe the fortune of those queens of Lord Krishna. They took care of him personally by rendering various transcendental services like bathing him. It's interesting as well. Obviously, it's not across the board, but if you look at, for instance, the National Health Service, I think it's fair to say that there are far more female nurses than male nurses. And they have much more of an affinity with those kind of personal services, looking after people, bathing them, etc. So the queens of Dwarka, although they were queens, they were no different. They loved engaging in bathing Krishna, feeding Krishna, and pleasing and serving him in all of those, what you might call menial ways, but actually, in reality, they're the most intimate and they're kind of the highest ways that you can engage in a relationship with someone like that. So Prabhupada explains that no one's austerities can compare to the service of the queens at Dwarka, and that's what they were rewarded with, this incredible personal service. So I think I will finish there, and I will say all glories to the devotion of the queens of Lord Krishna, and indeed all women, and I guess we'll throw men in there as well, who are endeavouring to follow in the footsteps of these great devotees. As mentioned today, the queens of Dwarka, there are many other great devotees too, but we were focusing on that today. So thank you all very much. I think the situation, it's hard to keep up to date because things are changing all the time, but I think the situation is that we may be able to resume our Sunday feasts in person in the not too distant future, and I look forward to that. And when we do that, I'll also be able to ask for questions and comments which aren't really possible, at least not on the forum or the medium that we use presently. So there we are. What time are we? Oh, I'm pretty good. I certainly didn't go over today. And I would love to ask for questions and for people to be able to ask questions. But as I say, that's not possible right now. So please stay strong. And no matter what the situation, and people have, some people have actually, I think, enjoyed the lockdown situation, but I think the majority of people have found it very, very tough over the last year or more. So all of you who are listening in today and who are feeling that way, as I say, please stay strong. Know that Krishna, whether there's a pandemic or isn't a pandemic, really has no bearing on our association with Krishna. Krishna's always there. He's dwelling in our hearts. And whenever we have, as referred to in that song, whenever any feelings of meaninglessness set in, then we can also go blowing our mind on God. And there is no better way to do that than chant as loudly as you possibly can Krishna's holy names. And Krishna's immediately present with you. And all of those negative feelings, Krishna will just completely remove them. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to you and all glories to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada